So here's my, my new attempt. This is Rossyia. It's called 1917. Not sure why. The game doesn't start until 1918. I think there were intentions at one point to create a slightly earlier start. There's options in the game. Well, not so much options. The basic rules allow the campaign game, which is what I'm playing, to start where you roll to see what happens to the Tsar. And the different players can bid some points, political points as it were, to determine what those chances are. I really didn't want to do that. That significantly can change the flow of the game, and I want to play a fairly historical starting point. So the Tsar is already dead, and he historically was at this point. I'm playing with 5 players, sort of, kinda. The game runs between 2 and 5 players, and we have the different basic factions here. Those are unreadable. Okay, so what they do is divide up basically the southern Russian whites and the northern Russian whites, who I think are here. Udinich, who's not on the map yet, into one base faction. The Southerns are a very powerful one, so that they're going to be the main force there. The other side of the whites has the Siberians, who stretch through here. Again, very powerful faction. And they have the Northern, who are operating in the same general area as Udinich, sort of, kind of. They're operating out of Archangel, whereas Udinich is going to be operating, I don't remember what, Latvia or something. Actually outside of what existed as the Soviet Union at this point. The Baltic states have their freedom. One other player is the Allies, which consists of, at this point, a small force in Archangel. Or is that Murmansk? No, I'm sorry, that's Murmansk. Archangel is nearby, but a small force in Murmansk with Miller, and another small force over here in Riga. They can intervene as well in the Black Sea fairly heavily, and right at the beginning of the game they could choose to intervene in the Caspian Sea as a small force of units. It's about 4 counters at what, I guess, the battalion or brigade level. Instead, I chose the somewhat larger intervention of the Romanians, which isn't really an intervention so much as an attempt to grab Bessarabia. The advantage of that is I can wipe out these Russian units that are sitting in Bessarabia, which seems a lot more impressive than whatever a couple of Allied units could do off the Caspian Sea intervention. Not positive of that, but the problem with the Bessarabian intervention is that it's a land grab, and the Russians can and will most likely just lose, and Romania will accept a peace that gives them what they want, which means those Romanian troops initially can come in and maybe hit as far as the Dnieper. They can't go any further than that. But then they pull back and go back to Romania. And eventually the Soviets can attack again to try to regain Bessarabia if they wish, but they don't have to. The other 2 factions are red factions, and these don't really have either territorial or any distinguishing features on the counters, unfortunately. The armies themselves, the counters, the divisional counters, and to some, I think everything's divisional. No, some special Russian units, motorized units, tanks, etc., are smaller than divisions. The divisions themselves can be commanded by anyone. The commanders have allegiance to one of the two factions, and the factions are essentially Stalin's old guard of Bolsheviks and Trotsky's somewhat newer people who aligned with him. I don't know if anybody was really as liberal as Trotsky was. Now, Trotsky is the person who essentially saved the Russian Revolution. And he's heavily favored as a leader. He's the best Russian leader. And there are a number of special rules involving him, one of which is later in the game, if he's sitting in Petrograd, where he is now, the Russians get more production, I believe. And that's a big factor. So the actual game plays much like an operational game, really, just with a large size. An interesting factor is that the armies at this time, other than say the Poles and the Allies and the Romanians, are very weak in terms of munitions, equipment, etc. So you see almost a return from that World War I technological breakthrough in the armies to something where regular cavalry is actually the most impressive units in the game. And over in the top left corner, they have a shock value, which is sort of the important value that combat units have. They also have a combat value, as in most games, but that's actually less important than the shock value. And then they also have a number of steps, which indicates the size for stacking purposes, and it also indicates how many losses the unit can take. There are big units with lots of steps that aren't terribly good, and there are very good units that have almost no staying power. Interesting situation. We also have the Czechs, as from RCW, sitting near the Siberians. They're actually controlled by the Allies, and they're allowed to fight for some time, but then they have to withdraw due to an event, and that's one of the things in the game. We have a couple piles of events over on the left and right side. I can't say a lot more, there's not a lot of time, but this is going to be fun, I think, and we'll see what I get.